Ruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem. Shem Irgen Shir most especially like to welcome everyone to tonight's drasha. Everyone who came in person, everyone who's joining on the phone, watching on the stream. Ruchim Aboim. Tonight we have the covered Ahavas once again, Rabbi Paysach Krohn Shlit, noted darshan and author, speak on the important topic of Ahavas Yisroel that can hopefully bring the Geula. I'd like to big yashikayach to the sponsors of tonight's shir. Rab Chaim Kaufman, Lila Nishmas Imoy, Malka Bas Rab Chaim Yehuda, Shalom Yotzad Beis Ov, Mr. and Mrs. Alti Freilich, Mr. Lezer Steinmetz of Weiss Paint, Mishpachas Wolf, Lila Nishmas Rab Osher Zelig, Ben Rav Vigdor, Shalom Yotzad Dalet Ov, Lila Nishmas, the Chusterov, Hagoyin Rav Shmuel, David, Ben Rav Tzvi, HaKoyin, Friedman, is Nifter Vov, Tofresh Tzadok Gimel, and the other Chusterov, Hagoyin Rav Yeshua Greenwald, Tzal, Nifter Vov, Toshin Chavtes, by the Mishpachis. Also, Mr. and Mrs. Noach Karas for sponsoring the broadcast of the Flapper Shiurim the whole summer. V'achin Chavev, the Be'elim Shem, Lili Neshama, Gershon Yosef ben Avram Zev, Yeshua ben Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Yeshua, Yosef Yitzchak ben Ahavas Yisroel, David ben Shlomo, Shlomo ben Moshe, Baruch Yaakov Yisroel ben Chaim Uri ben Yaakov Yisroel, Chai bas Gershon Yosef, Yenta bas Meir, Semester bas Chaim HaKoyin, Rivka Miriam bas Chaim Yitzchak, Yitamindel bas David, Yechevet bas Chaim Yitzchak, Baruch Amirel bas Chaim Yitzchak, Cheskel David ben Yaakov Tzvi, and Rosh Zelig ben Rav Vigdor ben Mishpachas Wolf. Aleim HaShalom, Tenish B'Seim Tzuras B'Tzara Chaim, to have the great Tzchus sponsoring one of the drashas. We'll have Sport Irgen Shir Yitayas Abotzas Atar worldwide. Call 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshiva.com. Now it's my cover to call Rabbi Krohn for tonight's drasha.
Just move it away. It's a tremendous chus to have been invited by Rabbi Loza Bald and Simcha Deutsch and the officers of Irgun Shiurei Torah to come to speak to this wonderful crowd. Now, I know Rabbi Bald can't be here tonight. Unfortunately, he has pneumonia and he's in the hospital. So just have him in mind in your tefillah, Loza Baruch ben Tzipoira. He should have a complete refuah and continue his great work for cities all around the world. I just want to tell you, Rabbi Bald, I know you're watching, and you could only see me, but I want you to know I'm speaking for 4,000 people. Now, if you turn around the camera, you're only going to see 40 people here. But let me just tell you, I'm speaking to them, to their children, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So Yossi and Sandy, I'm speaking to your grandchildren, because I know you're going to give over the message. So really, we're speaking tonight for 4,000 people. Remember, Yitzchak. What? More than 40 here. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, Shmuel Deutsch doesn't want to lose his job. Yeah, there's 60 here. Okay. You know, there's a very sad Gemara that is going to be the theme for our speech tonight. Many of us know the Gemara in Yuma Daf Tes Amud Beis. Aval Migdash Sheni Shahayu Oiskim B'Torah over mitzvahs and gemilas chasodim. In the second Beis Hamikdash, people were involved in Torah and mitzvahs and gemilas chasodim. But they machara. So if that's the case, why was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? Because there was hatred for no reason, baseless hatred. So of course it makes sense that what's the opposite of sinas chinam? Avas chinam. And that's why I decided tonight to speak about Avas Chinam, and I want to tell you tremendous stories. And if you take notes and you write it down, and you'll be able to tell them to your family, you'll see when something comes up and there's a situation, you'll be able to think about what did Rabbi Yosef Chaim do, what did Rabbi Lev Gurewitz do, Avram Gurewitz, and what did Rabbi Shom Shvadron do, what did Rabbi Zalman do, and these things will be ammunition for all of you when a situation comes up, and you'll be able to think, how should I act in a situation? So I want to tell you one of the greatest stories I ever heard, and they called me from Gateshead shortly after it happened, to tell this unbelievable story. There was a guy, let's call him Simchi, and he was a little bit of a wilder fellow. Thank you. By the way, without Voltaire, I couldn't do anything. So give him a round of applause. If I sneeze, he gives me the tissue. So this guy, Simchi, was a wilder guy, and he had learned in Gateshead for 3 years, and now he was going to Eretz Yisrael to learn. But they made him a Sudas Preda. A Sudas Preda means like a goodbye party. And everybody was there. The Rebbeim were there, his friends were there, the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Avram Gurewitz was there, and everybody spoke a few words, nice words about this boy Simchi, because everybody liked him. But they knew that if he spoke, it would be either hysterical or it would be so memorable. But what he said was so memorable, nobody could ever forget it. And afterwards, people called me to tell me what he said. It was amazing. And he said like this. He said, everybody knows that I'm a little bit wild. And when I first came to the yeshiva, after a day or two, I got into a tussle with a few guys, and they started chasing me. Now, I just came to Gateshead. I didn't know the layout of the place, so I was running into the building. I ran upstairs. I saw a big door. I ran inside. It was the Beis Medrash. And what am I going to do in the Beis Medrash? It was lunchtime. There were not too many people there, and I couldn't turn around because they were waiting for me outside. So I started running, and at the end of the Beis Medrash, I saw a door. So I figured I'll go to that door and I'll get out that way. But I opened the door, and I saw it's the library. It was the Oitzah Svarim. And there was no door on the other side. So how am I going to get out of here? If I go back into the Beis Medrash, they'll beat me up. So I was stuck in the Oitzah Svarim. So I quickly locked the door, and they started banging on the door. And I said, get out of here, you guys. You think I'm going to open up the door for me? You're going to break my head. And nothing. He said, I was in there, and then it was quiet, and then there was a knock. So I said, who's there? So I hear a voice, and it says, it's the Rosh Yeshiva. So I said, yeah, the Rosh Yeshiva. You're not the Rosh Yeshiva. Get out of here. You're trying to beat me up. Get out of here. And then there was quiet again, and then there was a knock again on the door. And I said, who's there? And he said, it's the Rosh Yeshiva. I need a sefer. Yeah, my foot, you need a sefer. You're trying to beat me up, that's all. And okay, so he was quiet, and he waited a few more minutes. It was still quiet again. And then, after a few minutes, there was a knock again. And he says, who's there? And a soft voice says, it's the Rosh Yeshiva. I need a sefer. Yeah, you're not the Rosh Yeshiva. Get out of here. And then it occurred to him, you know something? Maybe it is the Rosh Yeshiva. What's he going to do? So he opened up the door a little bit, and he saw, oh my God, it's the Rosh Yeshiva himself. So he didn't know what to do, because there was no way out. So, and if the Rosh Yeshiva would see him, he'd be out of the yeshiva in a day. He just got there 2 days ago. Anyhow, after a few minutes, once again, there's a knock on the door, and he says, I'm telling you, it's the Rosh Yeshiva. I need a sefer. So he opens the door a little bit, and he sees the Rosh Yeshiva standing like this, and that's how he goes into the room. He doesn't even look at him. And he says, I want all of you to know, the Rosh Yeshiva is a great Talmid Chacham, but his midas was so great, because if he didn't do that, if he didn't walk in that way, and he would have seen me, I would have left the yeshiva the next day. But because he didn't, he had the Ahavas Yisroel not to embarrass me, and just to look like this when he walked in. So I was able to stay in this yeshiva for 3 years. And that's the Hakoros HaTov I want to have to the Rosh Yeshiva. And we see, of course, the Rosh Yeshiva could have been very angry, but you see, that's how a great person is. That's a lesson of Ahavas Yisroel. Now, before I had my stroke, I was able to travel to different countries. And one of the countries I went to was in Brazil, and I was in São Paulo. São Paulo is a very nice community, but you wouldn't want to live there. Every house is guarded with gates and police, and you can't even walk into a shul. You have to walk into a chamber. They lock the door on both sides, and only when they realize nobody else is there, but only a guy who wants to daven, they'll let you go into the shul. Anyhow, so I was there to speak. And Motzei Shabbos Adam Lav Malka. So, you make Jewish geography. So I asked the guy, what's his name? He says, my name is Daniel Sonnenfeld. I said, Sonnenfeld? What do you mean? You related to Rabbi Rab Chaim? He said, yeah, that was my great-great-grandfather. I said, you got to be kidding. I never met anybody that's related to Rabbi Yosef Chaim. You got to tell me a great story about Rabbi Yosef Chaim. You know, I'm always looking for great stories, and then I want to write them down. So he said, I'll tell you a fabulous story that only people in our family know. I said, okay, go ahead. And he tells me this amazing story. When Rabbi Yosef Chaim was old in Nebuch, his wife passed away, and his daughter-in-law would come every day. Her name was Chasya Shena. Everybody called her Shena. And she would come and help her her father-in-law every single day. One day, as she's coming in, Rabbi Yosef Chaim opened the door for her, and he hears a woman crying. So he says, Shena, who's crying? She says, Zayda, I'll go out and I'll find out. And she goes outside, and she sees it's a Yemenite woman, and she is the washerwoman. She would collect all the laundry from everybody and then hang it up to dry and then bring it to people in the afternoon, and they would pay her, and that's how she had money to buy food for the kids on the way home. So she found out that day was Rosh Chodesh. And this Yemenite woman didn't know that there's a minig in Klal Yisrael that women don't do laundry on Rosh Chodesh, so nobody gave her laundry. So she was crying because she wasn't going to have parnasa. So that's what she told Rabbi Yosef Chaim. So listen to what he said. So Rabbi Yosef Chaim said to her, do we have any laundry? She said, yeah. He said, okay, take the laundry we have and go out and give it to her. So she goes out and she gives her the laundry. And when the neighbors saw that Rabbi Yosef Chaim gave the laundry, so they also gave the laundry. Finally, afterwards, she came in and she said, Zayda, I hope you don't mind my asking, but what about the minig that women don't do laundry on Rosh Chodesh? He said, a yid has to know priorities. That woman is an almana, helping an almana is a deraisa. Not doing laundry on Rosh Chodesh is a minig, and a deraisa takes precedence over a minig. So that's what we have to do. Many times, we try to be machmir at somebody's expense, but you have to know the priorities. Now, I want to tell you a story that Rab Shlomo once told me, and he cried when he told me this story, and I'll tell you at the end why he cried. But it also has to do with Rabbi Yosef Chaim. We're going to hear stories about Rabbi Yosef Chaim today that are just unbelievable. His tremendous, tremendous Ahavas Yisroel. What happened was, in Rabbi Yosef Chaim's shul, where he davened in the old city, 3 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, the Baal Shachris passed away. And everybody went to Rabbi Yosef Chaim and they said, Rebbe, who's going to daven for the Yomid? This guy davened so many years. The Rebbe said, don't worry, I'll appoint somebody. So they waited every week. They would come to the Rebbe on Shabbos and say, Rebbe, did you appoint anybody? He said, I told you, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And that was the night of Rosh Hashanah. The next morning, somebody's supposed to daven for the Yomid, and nobody was appointed. So they went to the Rav, and they said to him, Rebbe, who's going to daven tomorrow, Shachris? He said, don't worry, I told you, I'll take care of it. That night, after everybody left the shul, he calls over the son of the guy who used to daven, and he says, you're going to be the Baal Shachris tomorrow. He says, Rebbe, I never daven for the Yomid. He said, you heard your father 30 years, you'll know what to do. You go and do it. And sure enough, that's what he did. And that guy went up to daven. Afterwards, one of the Kanoim went over to Rabbi Yosef Chaim. There's always a guy in the shul who's a bigger tzaddik than the Rav. And he says to him, he says, Rebbe, doesn't it say in Shulchan Aruch that in the Oval is not allowed to daven Rosh Hashanah? This guy just lost his father a few months ago. He said, let me tell you something. Who was sitting in the ladies section? The almana of that Baal Tefillah. Imagine if she would hear, every year she heard her husband sing out Hamelach. Imagine if she had a strange man saying Hamelach, how she would cry. We would all cry from her tears. And being that she would cry like that, I felt the only one that would satisfy her would be her son. And that's when I paskin, that's as if there was nobody else to do it. And many of us have mothers that are almanas, or sister-in-laws that are almanas, or even, people in the neighborhood. You have to be so careful with an almana. And the reason Rab Shalom cried is because his mother became an almana when Rab Shalom was 7 years old. And it always hurt him so much how his mother had to suffer in poverty, and she had to wash floors. And I'm telling you, the way he treated my mother after my father passed away was so incredible. He talked to her with kid gloves. And I don't know if I should say this, but I probably shouldn't. But I'll tell you something that Rav Shalom once told me. Only somebody who understands Yiddish will appreciate this. And only a wife could say this to a husband. He told me that his wife, Leah, he called her Leika, and she called him Shalomka. She was the sister of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So she once told her husband, Shalomka, this verliebt in alle almonas. You're so careful with all the almonas. She used that expression. But the truth is, he was an absolute incredible person when it came to any almona, especially my mother, how he treated her. Now, there's a Medrash Tanchuma that I think is the balance of what we said from the Gemara and Yuma, that, the Beis HaMikdash will destroy because of sinas chinam. The Medrash Tanchuma is in Nitzavim, and it says like this, in Siman Aleph, Ein Yisrael negolin ad sheyiu kulan ba'aguda achas. Klal Yisrael is not going to be redeemed until we are like one group. What does that mean? To me, it means that if we have Ahavas Yisroel and we care for each other, so then we're going to have the Geula. We have to be Aguda Achas. But I think it's very, very important to know, when we say Aguda Achas, not everybody has to be the same. I don't have to be like you, you don't have to be like me, and none of us have to be like Sandy. Everybody's different. Everybody's got milas. Everybody got things that they could accomplish. So we have to be Aguda Achas in Ahavas Yisroel. And the Netziv, I want to show you certain things that the Netziv says that are out of this world. The Netziv says there's 4 types of people in Klal Yisrael. And he brings it from a pasuk in Nitzavim. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lefnei Hashem elokechem rosheichem. You have leaders in Klal Yisrael, people who guide us and tell us what to do. And then you have Zikeinehem, you have Talmidei Chachamim. There are many Talmidei Chachamim, but they're not leaders in Klal Yisrael. They could paskin halacha, they could give a shir. They're Talmidei Chachamim, but they're not the leaders. And then you have Kol Ish Yisrael, you have the men, and Tapcha and the Shechem, you have the women. So you have the leaders, you have the Talmidei Chachamim, and you have the men and the women. And then the Netziv says something which is so important. He says this in Bamidwa Tesvav Memalaf. She'ein hiluch avodas Hashem betmidosh shall kol bnei adam shavin. Every one of us here, and I know so many of you, everybody has their own way of serving Hashem. Nobody has to be the same. There's some people that are oisik b'Torah a whole day, and there's some people that are exceptional in tefillah. There's a guy here, Nigel Mandel, tonight. I told him I'm going to speak about a guy, Nigel, in our shul. In our shul, in Rav Tadabam shul, there's a guy, Nigel. If you sit next to him, it's impossible not to daven better. We had a guy, David Shomron, all over Shalom. I used to love to sit next to him when he davened. He was so special in saying every single word, as if he was counting $100 bills. And then there's people like Gemilas Chasadim. Every person, and the Tziv says, even in Torah, some people like Iyun, some people like Bekiyas, and he says even in mitzvahs, there's some people, they love the mitzvah of Shabbos, and some people love the mitzvah of tzitzis. Every person has their own way. So the Netziv said, so what should you do? How do you pick out what you should do? Should you be somebody that learns, somebody that damas, somebody that does chesed? So he brings a pasuk in Kehelas, Yud Aleph Tes, V'halech b'darki libecha. Everybody has certain inclinations. Everybody has certain feelings towards certain mitzvahs, or towards certain mitzvahs, or certain hanhogas. And if you have the mitzvah that way, that's what you should do, and you become exceptional. So when the pasuk says, when the Medrash Tanchuma says, "Ein Yisrael l'gol achabiya ba'aguda achas," it doesn't mean we have to be the same. Everybody has their own way of doing tremendous things. Now, I want to show you certain people that had a certain netiya to certain things, and we'll hear an amazing story. Now, I had an uncle. I never in my life called him Mike, but everybody called him, they called him Mike Tress. Many of you heard of him. He was the president of Ahavas Yisroel for 2 decades in America, and he loved doing chesed. So I love this story. I have a cousin, Tzvi Tress, who's Elimelech Tress's son. For many years, he was a tremendous asken in Toronto, and then he went to Miami once for vacation. And it was Shachris in the morning, and he had his talis bag on the on the table. So a Satmar guy with curly payas upturned out in the back of shit, just like me. And, no, inside, that's what I am. But anyway, he takes a look at his talis bag, and he says to him, "Do you have stress?" He said, "Yeah." See, this Samog ahead from my dress, the Satmar Chassid says. So he said, "Just give him my tata." So the Satmar guy stops, and he starts crying. His mom is crying. So Tzvi says to him, "You knew my father?" He said, "Let me tell you a story about your father." He said, "I came to America after the Second World War. I had no job whatsoever. I didn't have bread. I didn't have food for my children and wife for the Shabbos table. So somebody said to me, 'Why don't you go to the Aguda on Bedford Avenue? There's a guy, Mike Tress, he loves to do favors.' So I went to Mike Tress. I went to a guy, I didn't know who he was, no beard, and he said to me, 'Can I help you?' I said, 'I need parnosa. I don't have parnosa. I don't have food.' He said, 'Well, what do you do?' He said, 'I'm a glazier. I fix glass, in windows or in doors.' So he said, 'Your father said to me, oh, I know a glazier on Marcy Avenue, just a couple blocks away. Here, give him this note. He's my good friend, and give him to hire you.' And sure enough, I went there, and he's telling Tzvi Tress, the guy hired me, and I couldn't believe it. Every Friday, he gave me my money that I deserved, for working for him. And I had food for the table, food for my kids. I couldn't believe it. He said 4 months after I was there, my boss calls me in, and he says, 'I want you to go to Mike Tress and tell him he doesn't have to pay your salary anymore. I'm going to pay you myself. You're a good worker.' So what Mike Tress had actually done was, in that note, he said, 'Take this guy and pay his salary, and I will pay you. So like this, you'll be able to have it.' Many of us here remember Benny Fishoff. So Benny Fishoff did that same thing with a young kid who was moving to Eretz Yisrael, and he had no job. And Benny gave him a note to somebody in Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted a computer job. And he called the guy in Eretz Yisrael. The guy said, 'How can I hire this yeshiva guy? He doesn't know anything about computers.' So Benny said, 'Leave it to me. I will send you money every week. And after 6 months, if he's not good, I'll take care of him.' And sure enough, he paid for 6 months parnosa. And that's Ahavas Yisroel. Now, many of us, Baruch Hashem, are able to be givers. And we're able to help those people who don't have parnosa and who need jobs desperately. And now I want to tell you one of the greatest stories of Rabbi Yosef Chaim. In the old city of Yerushalayim, there was a little 7-year-old boy who never lost his father. And he was so traumatized that he stopped talking. And people went to Rabbi Yosef Chaim, and they said, 'Rebbe, maybe you could go be Menachem Av, the kid, and maybe you could get him to talk.' So Rabbi Yosef Chaim went to the house, and he sat by the boy, and he started talking to him, and they got into a conversation. And sure enough, the kid started talking. So as we said before, there's always these kanoim that are smarter than the Rav. So when Rabbi Yosef Chaim was leaving, a guy went over to him and says, 'Rebbe, doesn't it say in Shulchan Aruch, you're not supposed to talk to the Oval until he starts talking first?' You know what Rabbi Yosef Chaim said to him? 'You didn't hear him. He was screaming.' Imagine that. 'You didn't hear him. He was screaming.' And sometimes a person could be screaming and you don't hear the voice, but you know what's going on in his heart. And that's what Rabbi Yosef Chaim did. So, I want to tell you a very interesting story that happened with my brother-in-law. I have a brother-in-law, he's a very soft-spoken guy. I don't want to say where he lives because I don't want it to be a reflection on the area. But he opened a day camp for boys with 2 other guys. And after about 4 or 5 months, when the camp was doing well, these 2 other guys, they kind of ganged up against him, and they took the camp away from him, and they kept the profits. And, he was out of it. And he was so distraught, and they got into an argument back and forth. He said, "Oh, I started the camp together with you. How could you guys plan against me?" But, that's how it is sometimes in business. And he didn't know what to do. So, he called me, and I said, Rab Shalom Shvadron was in America at that time. So I said to him, "Why don't you go to Rab Shalom and ask him?" And this is an amazing thing. So he came to my mother's house. That's where Rab Shalom was. And he told him the story. So Rab Shalom took out his wallet. And he said, "I want to show you what I carry in my wallet." there's a letter that the Rambam wrote to his son. It's called Igeras HaMusar LeRav Avram Benoi. The Rambam had a son, Avram, and the Rambam wrote a letter to him. I'm going to read first one line in Hebrew and then the rest in English. Al teshaktzu es nafshei seichem b'machloikis. Don't defile your soul with arguments. Hamachale haguf, that destroys the body, v'hanefesh v'hamomen. It'll destroy your soul and your money. Uman yisha, what are you going to have left? Ra'isi, I saw Lavanim, people that were white complexioned, that his shchiru, their faces became black. He said, I saw families afflicted, princes removed from their prominence, large cities devastated, groups split asunder, and respectable people embarrassed and humiliated because of arguments. So Rab Shalom says, I keep this in my pocket because everybody somehow is going to get into an argument with other people. And he told them, I can't believe he told them this. He said, walk away from the camp. And my brother-in-law did that. I can't believe he did it. But, he's living a nice, quiet, peaceful life. He has a government job. But he did exactly what Rab Shalom told him. Part of Ahavas Yisroel is not to be involved in machloikis. But I want to show you a lady of Ahavas Yisroel that's just unbelievable. I have a friend, obviously, I can't mention his name. He has also a boys' camp. And the camp was very full every year. Let's call it Camp Godless. And unless Yitzchak, you can come up with a better name. You're the marked man. And Morty Melman, who's watching from someplace. But anyway, so this camp was filled every year. So this guy sent out a letter, my friend, 3 months before the camp. Please, everybody, if you want to send your son to the camp, please register and send in an email that you want your son to come to camp. So fine. And a lot of people came in, and he had no spaces left. And then one of the wealthiest women who had sent her son called him up, and he said, I'd like to register my son. He said, but didn't you get the email? I sent you the email. She said, yeah, we got the email, but we thought we were going to be in Israel this summer, but the plans changed, so now we need... He said, but how can I give away the space? Every spot is filled. I can't take away somebody's spot. So he said, but I promise you this. Every year in the camp, right before camp, somebody cancels out. And if somebody cancels out, I promise you'll get the spot. She said, okay, that's fair. Anyhow, 3 weeks later, Taka, somebody canceled, and he called her right away. He said, listen, a spot opened up, and if you want the spot, it's yours. You'll be able to have it. So she said, okay, she zelled in the money right away. And listen to this. The next day she called, Mika Amcha Yisroel. And she said like this, I want you to know all my life I was wealthy. As a child, as a teenager, and even now as an adult. I never had to wait for anything. I always got what I wanted first because I had the money. My family had the money. But this past 3 weeks, while I was waiting for you to call me, I had feelings that I never had before. I never worried whether I was going to get in or be accepted. And I never felt that pain. But now it occurred to me that there were a lot of people in your camp probably who felt this pain. They didn't think that they could get in. So I want you to know, if there's any kid that can't get in because they don't have the fee to pay for camp, I'll pay for it. And that's Mamash Avas Chinam, because she doesn't even know that person. She can't expect any favor. She's doing it for somebody who felt the pain of not being accepted. That's, to me, incredible. And I want to show you, all of us who had the schus to know Rav Matisyahu Solomon knew that he was such a wonderful, loving, kind person, besides being a tremendous Talmud Chacham and a Mashgiach and a great English accent, And it was always so great to listen to him. And he was never embarrassed. I couldn't get over. He's never embarrassed to speak English. Some Rosh Yeshivas, they're embarrassed to speak Goyish. I mean, that's the language. When you go to England, nobody's embarrassed. Rav Segal used to speak English, Rav Matisyahu, and all these people as well. So what happened was, when Rav Matisyahu first came to Lakewood, everybody wanted a piece of the action. And Friday night, a long line would stand and, to say good Shabbos to him. So one Friday night, there was this kid who was online, and he's waiting a long time, to be able to say good Shabbos to Mashgiach. So finally he comes up to the mashgiach and he says, Good Shabbos. And he says, Rebbe, could I ask the Rebbe a question? And Ramat Yisrael said, Mein Kind, of course. How can I help you? He says, Rebbe, I heard that the circus is coming to New Jersey. And I bought a ticket to go to the circus. But I heard that the Rebbe gave a shmuz and said that a frum boy should not go to the circus. But I bought a ticket already. Am I allowed to go? So Ramat Yisrael holds his hand, and he looks at him and he holds his hands, and he says, Yingala, I just want to tell you, now that you asked me, I've got to tell you the truth of what I feel. I feel a frum boy should not go to the circus. So the kid was downcast, and he said, okay, I won't go. And then he turns to leave, and Rav Matisyahu brings him back, and he said, we're still friends, right? So he said, yeah. He smiled, and he walked away. 6 months later, now, you know who told this story? Rab Meir Solomon, Rav Matisyahu's son. He told us by the yeshiva. 6 months later, Rav Matisyahu was in a car, and he says to his driver, take me into that shul. He says, Rebbe, where we're going? He said, you'll see. He goes into the shul. It's that boy's bar mitzvah. He had written down that night when the kid had said that he was his friend. I mean, obviously he wrote it after Shabbos. He wrote that he found out when the kid's bar mitzvah is. And then he came in, and the father and the kid almost fainted. Rab Matisyahu's coming to his bar mitzvah. So the father ran over to him, and he said, Mashgiach, I'm so happy you came, but what made you come? He said, do you mind if I say some divrei bracha? So the father said, no, of course not. And he brings the little boy next to him, and Rab Matisyahu was speaking at the bar mitzvah, and he tells the story that happened. And he said, the boy said we're still friends, so how could a friend not come to a friend's bar mitzvah? That was who Rab Matisyahu was. It was just absolutely incredible. Now, I just want to tell you one more story about Rab Matisyahu that the Epstein family told me. The Epstein family are neighbors to Rab Matisyahu. Now, when Rab Matisyahu first came in, and they moved next to the Epsteins, so the Epsteins had a daughter that was the same age as Rab Matisyahu, and they both were very close friends. And then it turned out that Rab Matisyahu's daughter was getting married, and this girl, Nebuch, she was an oval, her father had passed away, and she couldn't come to the wedding. So the night of the wedding, it's hard to believe, when they came home from work, the Epstein family, there was a note on the table, don't prepare supper. Supper's going to be delivered to all of you. And in an hour later, there was a caterer that came from the chasana with the shemorg, with the dessert, with the main dish, and all those things. And not only that, Rab Matisyahu hired a photographer to take pictures of the badeking and the chuppah and brought it to the family. These are all stories of Ahavas Yisroel that, you have to think beyond, out of the box. It's just amazing. And that's why I like to call this speech the AAA speech, Ammunition for Action in Ahavas Yisroel. Every single day we have opportunities to say a compliment, and that's really what I'm going to be talking about on the Rab Chaim video on Tisha B'Av, to give a compliment, to be machazik people. There's so many people that are so broken. I don't know how the Rebbes take it. Everybody comes with their tzoros. There's so many people that are sick and they have shalom bayis problems and kids going off the derech. And you have to be machazik. We need Ahavas Yisroel. And Ein Yisroel Negol Achiyu B'Aguda Achas. That's what I believe. That's what Aguda Achas means, to have Ahavas Yisroel and to hug people and to talk to them and be machazik them. And if you have an opportunity to help a person, that's really what you have to do. And I just want to tell you one more story about Rabbi Issa Zalman. And this is hard to believe, the story, but it's written in his biography. In the 1940s, there were so many bombs coming in Yerushalayim, and it was dangerous to walk outside. And Rabbi Issa Zalman's wife, Bela Hinda, she was Rabbi Aaron's mother-in-law, because Rabbi Issa Zalman was his father-in-law. She was a tremendous milamedes. She wrote down the shiurim of Rabbi Issa Zalman, and that's how they were printed, from her writings. But anyway, during the bombing, she said to her husband, please come into the shelter. And he said, no, if I learn, that'll be the biggest protection. And she was crying and begging him, please come into the shelter. He said, I'm telling you, I'm going to be okay. Finally, the bombs were not stopping. And then she said, please, I'm begging you, I'm so afraid. He said, okay, if they calm down, then I'll go outside. So the bombing calmed down a little bit, and then he went outside, and then all of a sudden, some more bombs came. And she said, come with me to the shelter. And he said, no, I'm afraid. And then she said, so let me yell for people to come. He said, you can't yell, because if there's bombs, and I yell or you yell, people are going to want to come. But there's bombs going on. We can't put people in a sakana. And so Mom, she was hit by shrapnel. He had to wear a cast for a year so he should be able to heal properly. And then eventually he went into the shelter and he was saved. I mean, this is not part of my speech, and I don't usually like to tell jokes, but I heard during the 6-Day War when there was some mother, wanted to tell her father to go into a shelter. He said, you got to bring me my teeth. I can't go into the shelter. So she said, Pa, they're not dropping sandwiches. They're dropping bombs. But anyway, the point is, that's really what Ahavas Yisroel is all about. And I just want to end just with this thing. I know I'm ending a little early, but today somebody asked me, what's the difference between rachamim and chesed? Think about it for a second. What's the difference between rachamim, compassion, and chesed? So I saw a beautiful answer. Rachamim is when you're asking what another person needs. Chesed is when you're thinking, what could I give? And every one of us can give. You can give a compliment, you can give money, you can give chizuk, you can give pens, whatever. Everybody has something that they can give to make somebody feel special. You can invite somebody to a house for a meal for Shabbos and guests, and that's exactly what we want to talk about. The Ahavas Yisroel, the Rachamim, the Chesed. And I believe that if we could only take some of these stories, and when somebody's in pain, and we feel their pain, and call them. There's so many people that are stuck at home, whether in rehab centers or at home because they can't get out, or because they don't have jobs. Let's try to think. The Rab Chaim writes in Sefer Ahavas Chesed, Ma'oid tzorach lizoyer. Ma'oid, he writes, a person has to be zoyer shalei yechsaloi midas hachesed. Not one day should go by from today on that you don't do a chesed for somebody else. I want to tell you something that I do. I don't usually like to talk about this, but every single day I don't go to sleep until I wrote down a chesed that I did for another person. And I don't include my children in that. That you got to do, and your wife. That you got to do if you know it's good for you. But I'm talking about there's so many people that need chizuk. And if you write that down, I'm telling you, I guarantee you that your life will change. Because Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is your shadow. If you do for others, others will do for you. And again, that's what the Rab Chaim says in Perikut Beis and Ahavas Chesed. Ma'oid tzorach lizoyer shelo yechsaloi midas hachesed afilu yom echad midei chayav. So one of the things that we can do tonight is when we say Refu'enu, we should have Allah Baruch ben Sipora in mind. He's a tremendous tzaddik, a Talmud Chacham. He's a mechaber of Svarim, and he arranges shiurim, hundreds of shiurim throughout the world. And he's one of the great people in our generation. And I just want to end with this story about a person that I love so much, and that's Rab Nosson Sherman. And he told this story, and I just called him the other day just to confirm it. He was in the 6th grade in Yeshiva Torah Das in Williamsburg. And one day, I don't know how you remember, that the principals in Torah Das in those days was Rabbi Pinkus and a Dr. Stern. And one day, Dr. Stern came into the class, and Rabbi Hirsch Kaplan, who was the Rebbe, wasn't expecting Dr. Stern to come in. And Dr. Stern wanted to speak to the Bochurim, but he came in by surprise. Now, Rabbi Hirsch Kaplan had a midah that if a kid was bad, he wrote his name on the board, and when the kid was good, he would erase it. So he and now Dr. Stern was in the class, and Rabbi Kaplan was afraid that he's going to see the names on the board. So let me hold on to this. Just hold on. As Dr. Stern is talking, Rabbi Kaplan went against the blackboard and started with his bekisha erasing the names. And when Rabbi Sherman said, when Dr. Stern walked out and Rabbi Hirsch Kaplan accompanied him out the door, so he saw all the chalk on the back of the Bekisha. And that's Yehi Kavod Chavecha, Yehi Kavod Talmida Chovav Alecha Kishaloch. That the covet of your Talmud should be just as strong as the covet of yourself. And I just hope that tonight that we learned some stories we learned about Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld with the washerwoman, and we learned about the little boy who was the oval, and we learned about Rav Shalom Shvadron and Rabbi Yosef Chaim who appointed the son of the Bal Tfilah, and we learned about Rabbi Hirsch Kaplan, and we see that Ein Yisrael the Geula Achiyil B'Aguda Achas. Every single person has different talents. Try to see that you should be not only rachamim to think what the other person needs, but be active, be proactive. And the word and chesed means what could I give to others? And I once heard that the word reaction and creation are spelled with the same letters. So we shouldn't only be people of reaction, be people of creation. Figure out what can I do to help another Yid. The Eibusher should help that Allah Zabal should have a for Shlema. I'm sorry we're stopping a little bit early, but I hope that everybody will learn the lessons of Ahavas Yisroel, and we should be nigal together and be able to have Igun Shiur Torah in Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh. Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. Okay.
Just sit down.
It's okay.
Shem Igun Shiur Torah, like to give big ashikach to Rabbi Krohn for the inspiring drasha. Like to give big ashikach to the sponsors of tonight's drasha, Rab Chaim Kaufman, Yudinish Masimoy, Malka Bas Rab Chaim, Yehuda, Shalom. Okay, excuse me, everyone. Please go around the other way. I'm trying to make an announcement. Please go around. Please go around. It's not by Kovadik. I'm talking to the mic. I'm on the camera. People, everyone's crowding. Mr. and Mrs. Alti Freilach, Mr. Laser Steinmetz of Weiss Paint, Mishpachas Wolf, Lili Nishmas of Bosha Zelebun, Ravigdol of Ashalom, Yosef Dalarov, Mr. and Mrs. Nara Karas is sponsoring the broadcast of the Flat Bashirim all summer. The Mishpachas of the Rabbanim of Chust, Rabbi Shmuel David ben Tzviak Cohen, Friedman, Yosef Vavav Tafresh Sadik Gimel, and Hagoyim B'Shua Greenwald, Zatzal Yosef Vavav Toshin Chav Tes. Also Be'elam Shem, the main sponsor of tonight, the Neshomesh of Gershon Yosef ben Avram Zev, Yeshua ben Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Yeshua, Yosef Yitzchak ben Yisroel, David ben Shlomo, Shlomo ben Moshe, Baruch Yaakov Yisrael ben Chaim Uri, Chaim Uri ben Yaakov Yisroel, Chaya bas Gershon Yosef, Yenta bas Meir, Sumesta bas Chaim HaKohen, Rivka Miriam bas Chaim Yitzchak, Yitta Mindel bas David, Yechavet bas Chaim Yitzchak, Baruch Amir bas Chaim Yitzchak, Cheskel David ben Yaakov Tzvi, and Rabbi Zelig ben Ravigdor Mishpachas Wolf, Aleim HaShalom, Tenish B'Sem Tzuras B'Sar HaChaim. To have the great schus of sponsoring a share or to help support the Abotzas HaTorah of Igun Shiur Torah worldwide, call 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Chananya ben Akash Eimer Tzagadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakes L'Yisrael L'Fig Hiblam Torah Mitzvah Shenem Adonai Chalfetz L'Man Tzidkoi Yagdol Torah V'Yader.
Skadal v'Iskadash Shmei Rabo V'Yomo D'Vorach Yerusei V'Yamlich Marusei V'Yatzma Bukonei V'Korei Mishichei V'Chayei Choyne V'Yemei Choyne V'Chayei B'Chol Beis Yisrael V'Agolo V'Zman Kariv V'Yimru Amen Shmei Rabo V'Vorach Olam Omei Omayo